I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. Albright, a woman whose stern features seemed permanently etched into a mask of disapproval, had delivered them with an almost surgical precision, each syllable designed to inflict maximum damage. Lisa stood there, a small, trembling figure in her pressed, though undoubtedly worn, nurse's scrubs, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles had turned white, her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage, threatening to burst free. Shame, a hot, acrid wave, washed over her, mixing with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as though every late night, every early morning, every desperate, silent tear she'd shed in the dim light of her mother's sick room had been laid bare and judged wanting. Lisa, a nurse by calling and by nature, had always found solace in the ordered chaos of the public hospital in Boston. For years, the crisp scent of disinfectant, the rhythmic hum of medical equipment, the urgent murmur of voices had been the symphony of her purpose. She was 34, her face often etched with a quiet intensity, framed by practical, pulled-back brown hair that rarely escaped its confines. Her eyes, usually a warm, empathetic hazel, were now shadowed with a profound sadness, mirroring the relentless struggle that had consumed her life for the past year. Her emotional state was a delicate balance, a tightrope walk, between unwavering devotion and the crushing weight of impending failure. Every sunrise brought with it a fresh wave of anxiety, a silent question of how much more she could endure. The joy that once sparked in her when a patient recovered, or when she managed to bring a smile to a frightened face, had been slowly, subtly eroded by the constant gnaw of worry. She was a woman teetering on the precipice, holding on by a thread of stubborn love. Her mother, Margaret, was the anchor and the storm in Lisa's world. 68 years old, Margaret had once been a vibrant, independent woman, her laughter a bright, melodic sound that could fill any room. Now, ravaged by a debilitating neurological condition that had crept insidiously into her life, she was a shadow of her former self, largely confined to her bed in their modest two-bedroom apartment. Her once nimble hands trembled uncontrollably, her voice often slurred, and her memory, once sharp as a tack, would flicker in and out like a faulty light bulb. Margaret was not just Lisa's mother. She was Lisa's first patient, the one whose well-being superseded all other duties, professional or otherwise. The very thought of her mother alone, vulnerable, struggling to reach a glass of water or navigate the few steps to the bathroom, sent a jolt of ice through Lisa's veins. The central conflict of Lisa's life was a brutal one, the collision of her professional obligation with her filial duty. She was a nurse, sworn to care for others, yet her own mother, the woman who had nurtured and loved her unconditionally, now demanded every ounce of her remaining strength and attention. The inciting incident, the spark that had ignited the current agonizing fire, had occurred just 2 days prior. Margaret had suffered a particularly severe episode, a sudden, frightening decline that left her disoriented and weak. Lisa, after a sleepless night spent tending to her mother's increasingly urgent needs, had made the impossible choice. She had called in sick, again, her voice thick with guilt and exhaustion, knowing full well the precariousness of her position at Boston's bustling public hospital. This decision, born of pure necessity and love, had now led her here, to this cold room, facing the grim pronouncement of her dismissal. The stakes were terrifyingly clear. Short term, she faced immediate unemployment, a gaping chasm in her already strained finances. Long term, the threat loomed larger, more existential. The potential loss of her very calling as a caregiver, a profession that was not just a job, but the very essence of who Lisa believed herself to be. How could she care for others if she couldn't even keep her own life from unraveling? The thought was a raw, aching wound. Act 1. Juggling duty and family care. The scent of stale coffee and hospital-grade antiseptic was a constant companion in Lisa's life, a familiar blend that clung to her scrubs, her hair, even her skin. It was the aroma of her purpose. But lately, it had begun to feel like the scent of a cage. Her days, for months now, had become a relentless, exhausting ballet, a desperate attempt to balance two equally demanding worlds that refused to align. The pre-dawn quiet of her small apartment on the outskirts of Roxbury would often be shattered not by an alarm clock, but by a soft, confused moan from Margaret's room. Lisa would be instantly awake, her body already tensed for the day's first challenge. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet as she padded into the dimly lit room, the faint glow of the street lamp outside casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, adorned with faded family photos. Margaret, her face a roadmap of worry and pain, would be stirring, sometimes calling out a name from a distant memory, sometimes simply struggling with the weight of her own body. Lisa would gently brush the thin strands of hair from her mother's forehead, her touch light and reassuring. "It's okay, Mama. I'm here," she would whisper, her voice a soothing balm in the quiet darkness. The ritual would begin, helping Margaret to the bathroom, a slow, painstaking journey that often left both of them breathless, preparing a soft, easily digestible breakfast, coaxing her mother to eat just a few more bites, administering the morning medications, carefully crushing pills, measuring liquids, always ensuring Margaret swallowed each one. Each task, simple in isolation, became an Everest when performed under the crushing weight of time constraints and the constant ache of her mother's declining health. The apartment itself, once a cheerful hub of activity, now felt like a sanctuary under siege. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the slightly grimy windows, casting a soft, muted light on the worn furniture and the stacks of medical supplies that had begun to colonize every available surface. The air often carried the faint, sweet sickly scent of sickness, mingled with the lingering aroma of whatever Lisa had managed to cook the night before. The silence, when it fell, was never truly empty. It was filled with the unspoken anxieties, the heavy breathing of Margaret, the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall that seemed to mock Lisa with its relentless march. Leaving for her shift at the hospital was always the hardest part of the morning. Each goodbye felt like a betrayal, a tearing of her own flesh. She would check on Margaret one last time, adjusting the pillows, placing the remote control and a glass of water within easy reach, whispering promises she prayed she could keep. "I won't be long, Mama. Just a few hours. Mrs. Henderson will check in on you." Mrs. Henderson, a kind elderly neighbor, was a lifeline, but Lisa knew her help was limited, a fragile thread in a rapidly fraying tapestry. The guilt was a physical knot in her stomach, tightening with every step she took away from the apartment, away from her mother's vulnerable gaze. The hospital, with its bright fluorescent lights and its ceaseless demands, offered a different kind of burden. Lisa moved through its labyrinthine corridors like a ghost, her movements precise, professional, but her mind constantly pulled back to the small apartment across the city. On the oncology ward where she primarily worked, the suffering was palpable, an almost living entity that permeated the very air. She would tend to her patients with the same dedication and empathy that had always defined her, offering comfort, administering treatments, monitoring vital signs. Yet, even as she held a trembling hand or listened patiently to a patient's fears, a part of her was always listening for her phone, always picturing her mother alone. Her colleagues, mostly, were understanding, or at least polite. Dr. Chen, a gruff but kind-hearted oncologist, would sometimes catch her eye across the ward, a silent nod acknowledging the invisible battle she was fighting. But Ms. Albright, the head nurse, was a different breed. Albright was a stickler for rules, a woman who saw the hospital as a finely tuned machine, and any deviation as a wrench thrown into its gears. She had little tolerance for personal excuses, especially when they impacted staffing schedules. Lisa had already received 2 written warnings for her absences, each one a stark, chilling reminder of the precipice she stood on. One particularly grueling Tuesday, Lisa had been assigned to a triple shift, a financial necessity to cover mounting medical bills and household expenses. The ward was unusually busy, a fresh influx of patients stretching the staff thin. Dr. Chen was particularly stressed, his brow furrowed as he reviewed charts. A new patient, a young woman named Sarah, was admitted, her eyes wide with terror as she faced her diagnosis. Lisa spent extra time with her, explaining procedures, offering gentle reassurances, feeling the familiar pull of her nurse's heart. But every time she paused, her mind would drift. Had Mrs. Henderson remembered to give Margaret her afternoon snack? Had her mother managed to take her medications? The internal monologue was relentless, a dual narrative playing out simultaneously in her head. Lisa, a word. Ms. Albright's voice, cool and precise, cut through the din of the ward. Lisa's shoulders tensed. She knew what was coming. Albright led her to a small, glass-walled office, the kind where difficult conversations were held, shielded but not entirely private. The supervisor's desk was meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the burgeoning chaos of Lisa's own life. "Your attendance, Lisa, continues to be an issue," Albright began, her voice devoid of inflection. She held up a clipboard, its contents a damning indictment of Lisa's recent record. "This is your 3rd absence in 2 weeks, and the 4th this month. We are short-staffed as it is. Every time you call out, it places an undue burden on your colleagues, and more importantly, it compromises patient care." Lisa swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "I understand, Miss Albright. I truly do. But my mother, she had a particularly bad turn. There was no one else." Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with desperation. She wanted to explain, to make Albright understand the impossible bind she was in, the agonizing choices she was forced to make. She wanted to describe the terror in her mother's eyes, the helplessness she felt. Albright merely raised an eyebrow, a gesture that spoke volumes of her skepticism. "We have policies, Lisa, strict policies. Family care is important, yes, but not at the expense of your professional responsibilities. We offer family leave options, but you've exhausted those. And frankly, this isn't a sustainable situation. We can't have a nurse who is perpetually distracted, whose mind is elsewhere. It's not fair to the patients who rely on you, and it's not fair to the hospital that employs you." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Lisa felt a cold dread settle in her bones. She knew then that she was losing the battle. She walked out of that office feeling physically lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted, only to realize it was the weight of her hope now gone. That night, she barely slept, tossing and turning in her narrow bed. The image of Albright's unyielding face superimposed over her mother's frail one. The world outside their small apartment seemed to shrink, becoming a hostile, unforgiving place. The sounds of the city, usually a comforting backdrop, now felt distant, indifferent. The early morning light, filtering through the blinds, held no promise, only the chilling certainty that the next call-out, the next unavoidable choice, would be her last. Her heart ached with a profound sense of isolation, a feeling that she was truly alone in this fight, facing an insurmountable wall built of rules, policies, and a system that had no room for the complexities of human love and suffering. The hospital, once her sanctuary, now felt like a cold, impersonal machine, ready to discard her. Act 2, she loses her job while caring for her mother. The inevitable arrived with the quiet cruelty of a snowstorm on an already bleak day. Margaret's condition had worsened steadily over the following week, a relentless, downward slide that stole more of her lucidity, more of her physical strength. One frigid morning, as Boston shivered under a blanket of sleet and ice, Lisa found her mother struggling to breathe, her shallow gasps echoing ominously in the small apartment. Panic, cold and visceral, seized Lisa. Her nursing instincts screamed at her to act, to call for help, to stabilize. But her daughter's heart screamed louder, demanding her presence, her touch, her unwavering focus. The hospital, her shift, her professional duty, faded into a distant, secondary concern. There was only Margaret, gasping for air, her eyes wide with a fragile fear. Lisa spent the next 24 hours in a blur of frantic care. She administered oxygen she had rented, adjusted her mother's position, wiped her feverish brow, and spoke soothing words into the quiet, heavy air. She called Mrs. Henderson, but the elderly neighbor was laid up with the flu herself. There was no one else. The world outside their apartment ceased to exist. She didn't call the hospital. She couldn't. Her phone sat silently on the kitchen counter, a forgotten artifact of a life she no longer fully inhabited. Every fiber of her being was dedicated to the frail woman in the bed, every breath a prayer, every touch an act of profound, desperate love. The hours blurred into a continuous, anxious vigil. The only sounds were Margaret's labored breathing, the occasional creak of the old house settling, and the frantic drumming of Lisa's own heart. The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of unspoken fear, the metallic tang of illness, and the faint, sweet scent of the lilies Margaret used to love, now wilting in a vase by the window. When the hospital finally called, it was late morning the following day. Lisa answered, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep and the dry lump of anxiety in her throat. It was Miss Albright. Her tone, devoid of any warmth, was colder than the winter air outside. Lisa, your absence has been noted, without notice, without explanation. This is a direct violation of your employment contract, following multiple prior warnings. There was a pause, a moment of silence that stretched, pregnant with finality. Lisa could hear the faint, distant sounds of the hospital, a code blue overhead, the rumble of a supply cart, a world she was rapidly being severed from. We regret to inform you that your employment with Boston Public Hospital is terminated, effective immediately. The words struck Lisa like a physical blow. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the worn linoleum floor. The sound was surprisingly loud in the sudden, cavernous silence of the apartment. She stared at the phone, then at her hands, which felt alien, disconnected. Unemployment. The word echoed hollowly in her mind, a death knell for her precarious financial stability. But more than that, it was the loss of her identity. She was a nurse. That was who she was. Without it, who would she be? A caregiver, yes, but without the professional dignity, the purpose, the ability to earn a living doing what she loved. The stakes, once abstract and distant, were now terrifyingly real. Losing her calling. It wasn't just a job. It was the very fabric of her being, woven with threads of empathy, skill, and an unshakable desire to heal. The thought was a raw, gaping wound in her soul. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous, agonizing routine of despair and devotion. Lisa applied for unemployment benefits, filled out endless forms, and navigated the impersonal labyrinths of bureaucracy, each interaction a fresh reminder of her sudden stark reality. The small amount of savings she had dwindled rapidly, eaten away by rent, utilities, Margaret's increasingly expensive medications, and the basic necessities of life. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, its walls closing in on her. The silence, once heavy, now felt oppressive. amplifying her every fear. She would sit by Margaret's bedside for hours, holding her mother's frail hand, stroking her wispy hair, watching the rise and fall of her chest, her mind a maelstrom of anxious thoughts. How would they survive? What would become of them? Margaret, in her flickering moments of clarity, sensed Lisa's distress, though she couldn't fully grasp its cause. "My girl," she would murmur, her voice weak, "you look so tired. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." And each time, a fresh wave of guilt would wash over Lisa. How could she burden her mother with her own struggles? How could she explain that her job, her purpose, had been sacrificed on the altar of their love, and now they were both adrift? She would force a smile, a hollow, brittle thing, and reassure Margaret, "I'm fine, Mama, just a little sleepy. You're my priority." The weight of loneliness pressed down on her. Her few friends from the hospital, busy with their own demanding lives, occasionally called, offering platitudes and sympathy, but their words felt hollow, unable to penetrate the thick wall of her isolation. She avoided social media, fearing the cheerful updates of others would only deepen her despair. The world outside, vibrant and indifferent, seemed to mock her quiet suffering. She felt invisible, a forgotten cog in a vast, uncaring machine. The injustice of it all gnawed at her, a constant, dull ache. She had sacrificed everything for love, for duty, and for that she had been discarded. The system, designed to protect and provide, had instead cast her out, leaving her vulnerable and alone. One particularly bleak afternoon, as the rain lashed against their window pane, Lisa found herself staring at the worn photograph of her and Margaret, taken years ago at a family picnic. Margaret was beaming, her arms wrapped around a much younger, carefree Lisa, who was laughing, her head thrown back. The contrast between that vibrant image and their current reality was a punch to the gut. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down Lisa's face, tracing paths through the smudges of exhaustion. She cried for her lost job, for her dwindling savings, for the crushing weight of her responsibilities. But mostly, she cried for Margaret, or the vibrant woman she once was, and for the fragile, dependent woman she had become. She cried for the unfairness of it all, for a world that demanded so much and offered so little in return for selfless love. The silence that followed her sobs was profound, broken only by the rhythmic patter of rain and Margaret's soft, regular breathing. It was a silence filled with questions, with fears, with the raw, exposed nerves of a woman pushed to her absolute limit. Lisa felt a profound sense of powerlessness, a crushing realization that despite all her skills, all her dedication, she was utterly at the mercy of circumstances beyond her control. The hospital, the institution she had served with every fiber of her being, had, in a single, cold pronouncement, stripped her of her professional identity, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The sense of betrayal was a bitter taste in her mouth, a constant reminder of the system's inherent indifference to individual human struggles. She had always believed in the sanctity of care, in the moral imperative to look after those who couldn't look after themselves. But what about the caregivers? Who cared for them when they crumbled under the weight of their own burdens? The thought was a dark, swirling eddy in her mind, pulling her deeper into the depths of despair. She was trapped, a butterfly pinned to a board, wings uselessly fluttering against the sharp, unyielding pin of her circumstances. The financial pressure began to mount with an almost terrifying speed. The late notices started arriving, stark white envelopes that felt heavy with impending doom. The electricity bill, the gas bill, the phone bill, each one a fresh assault on her dwindling reserves. She sold a few pieces of jewelry, heirlooms that had belonged to her grandmother, the act itself a painful severance from her past. The small, familiar comforts of their home began to feel like luxuries they could no longer afford. The refrigerator, once stocked with fresh produce and healthy meals, now held only sparse, unappetizing remnants. Lisa found herself rationing food, always ensuring Margaret had enough, even if it meant her own stomach growled in protest. Her clothes, once practical and well-maintained, now showed signs of wear, the fabric thinning, the colors fading. Each threadbare patch was a silent testament to her struggle. One evening, as she was preparing a meager dinner of instant noodles, Margaret, in a moment of unsettling clarity, looked at her with eyes that seemed to pierce through Lisa's carefully constructed facade. "Lisa," she whispered, her voice surprisingly strong, Are we okay? You look so thin, my darling. And so sad." The question, so simple, so direct, shattered Lisa's composure. She knelt by her mother's bedside, burying her face in the worn quilt, and for the first time in weeks, allowed herself to truly break. The sobs racked her body, deep, guttural sounds that seemed to tear at her very soul. She confessed everything: the job loss, the mounting bills, the terrifying uncertainty of their future. Margaret, though frail, managed to stroke Lisa's hair, her touch surprisingly firm. "My brave girl," she murmured. "We'll get through this. We always do. You were always so strong." But Lisa didn't feel strong. She felt utterly, irrevocably broken. The weight of her mother's unwavering faith in her was almost as heavy as the despair itself. How could she live up to that faith when she felt like a complete failure? The words of Miss Albright, the cold, clinical dismissal, replayed in her mind like a broken record, each syllable a fresh sting. She had dedicated her life to caring, to healing, to alleviating suffering. And for that, she had lost everything. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She was a nurse, trained to heal, yet she couldn't heal her own unraveling life. She felt like a ship adrift in a storm, its sails torn, its rudder broken, with no land in sight. A vast, indifferent ocean of her circumstances threatened to swallow her whole. The city of Boston, usually a vibrant tapestry of life, now seemed to press in on them, its towering buildings a silent, imposing testament to a world that moved on without them. The dreams she once held, of a comfortable life, of continued professional growth, of perhaps one day having her own family, seemed to dissolve into the cold, rainy air, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of survival. The future was a blank, terrifying canvas stretching out before her, utterly devoid of color or hope. Tell me in the comments which city you are listening to this story from. Like and share with someone who loves emotional stories. Act 3. The public learns her story and rallies around her. The lowest point arrived on a Tuesday morning, a day that dawned gray and bleak, mirroring the landscape of Lisa's heart. A final notice, stark red letters screaming eviction, had been slipped under their door. The landlord, a stern, unyielding man, had made it clear: no rent, no roof. Lisa stared at the paper, her vision blurring, the words swimming before her eyes. This was it, the absolute end. Not just unemployment, not just financial ruin, but homelessness. Her mother, her frail, beloved mother, would be out on the street. The thought was a physical punch to her gut, leaving her breathless and cold. She felt a primal scream rising in her throat, but it died there, choked by despair. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling, a small, lost figure, in the center of their increasingly empty apartment. The silence in the room was deafening, a heavy blanket that threatened to smother her. In a desperate, almost unconscious act, Lisa turned to her laptop, its screen a dusty, ignored portal to the outside world. She hadn't checked her email or social media in weeks, retreating into her shell of grief and responsibility. As she logged onto a local community forum, seeking any shred of information about emergency housing or assistance programs, a notification flashed across the screen. It was from Sarah, the young oncology patient she had spent extra time with just before her dismissal. Sarah, it turned out. The title blared, "Reinstate Nurse Lisa, Compassion Shouldn't Cost a Career." Below it, Sarah had penned a heartfelt, eloquent description of Lisa's dedication, her unwavering empathy, and the impossible choice she had been forced to make. Sarah had witnessed Lisa's struggle firsthand, not just as a patient, but as a human being, observing another's quiet heroism. The petition detailed Lisa's excellent record, her years of service, and the cruel irony of her dismissal. Fired for caring for her own family, the very essence of her professional ethos. Sarah had included a photo she'd secretly taken of Lisa holding her hand, her face etched with a quiet intensity, a gentle smile playing on her lips. It was a powerful, poignant image that perfectly captured Lisa's nurturing spirit. Lisa read the words, her eyes scanning over the growing number of signatures, each one a silent testament to a stranger's support. A tremor started in her hands, then spread through her entire body. Tears welled up, but these were different. These were tears of bewildered gratitude, a slow, tentative thaw in the frozen landscape of her despair. She felt a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the suffocating weight on her chest. Could it be? Could someone actually care? Over the next few days, what had started as a small, local petition exploded into a viral phenomenon. Sarah, with her innate understanding of online communities and her network of fellow patients and advocates, had unleashed a torrent. The story, picked up by local news outlets and then swiftly by national online publications, resonated deeply with millions. It wasn't just a story about a nurse. It was a story about the crushing burden of caregiving, the impossible choices families are forced to make, and the systemic failures that often penalize compassion. People shared their own similar struggles in the comments, their stories weaving a vast tapestry of empathy and shared experience. The hashtag #StandWithLisa trended across social media platforms. Lisa, still in a daze, watched it unfold from the quiet corner of her apartment. The sheer volume of messages, comments, and shares was overwhelming. She spent hours scrolling through them, her heart swelling with an emotion she hadn't felt in months. Hope. There were messages from former patients, recounting her kindness, from fellow nurses, sharing their own experiences of burnout and impossible demands, from complete strangers, expressing outrage at the hospital's decision and solidarity with her plight. Donations, small at first, then larger, began to pour in through a crowdfunding link Sarah had set up. People offered advice, resources, even offers of help with Margaret. The digital world, which had often felt so distant and impersonal, had become a vibrant, empathetic community, rallying around her. Her small apartment, once a symbol of her isolation, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. The phone, once silent, now rang incessantly with interview requests from local and national news channels. Lisa, initially hesitant, agreed to speak, her voice trembling but gaining strength with each interview. She spoke not just for herself, but for all caregivers, for all those caught between professional duty and family love. Her vulnerability, her honesty, and her quiet dignity captivated audiences. She didn't demonize the hospital. She simply articulated the impossible position she had been in, highlighting the broader systemic issues that needed to be addressed. The hospital, caught completely off guard by the public outcry, initially issued a terse, defensive statement, citing policy. But as the pressure mounted, as news channels broadcast images of Lisa holding Margaret's hand, as prominent figures in healthcare and politics weighed in, their stance began to soften. Miss Albright was noticeably absent from any public statements, replaced by the hospital's PR department, now in full damage control mode. The hospital administration, facing a severe backlash and potential reputational damage, was forced to reconsider. They offered Lisa her job back, complete with an apology and a promise to review their family leave policies. But something fundamental had shifted within Lisa. The initial surge of relief at the offer was quickly replaced by a quiet, profound realization. The old system, the one that had broken her, no longer held the same power. The experience had transformed her, not just into a symbol of resilience, but into a woman who had found her own voice, her own strength, beyond the confines of a hospital badge. She remembered the early days of despair, the feeling of utter powerlessness, the crushing weight of having her calling stripped away. Now, she held a different kind of power. The outpouring of support, the donations, the shared stories, it was more than just a lifeline. It was a revelation. It showed her that there was a desperate, unmet need for compassionate, personalized home care. People wanted their loved ones to be treated with dignity, with understanding, not just as cases in a cold clinical system. The idea, initially a faint whisper, began to grow into a clear, resonant vision. Why return to a system that had failed her, when she could build something new, something better? She sat by Margaret's bedside one evening, the room bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Margaret, surprisingly lucid, looked at her daughter with a knowing smile. "You look different, my girl," she murmured, her voice soft but clear, stronger. "What are you thinking?" Lisa took her mother's hand, a warmth spreading through her. "I'm thinking, Mama," she said, her voice filled with a newfound resolve, "that it's time to build something of our own, something that truly puts care first." The decision, when it finally solidified, felt less like a choice and more like an inevitable unfolding, a natural progression of her journey. The donations, far exceeding what she needed for immediate relief, provided the seed money. The public's trust, their outpouring of support, provided the fuel. Lisa, the heartbroken nurse, was slowly, steadily transforming into Lisa, the empowered founder. The path ahead would be challenging, she knew, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt a profound sense of purpose, a guiding light illuminating the darkness. Her character arc, once bending towards despair, was now arcing sharply towards an unforeseen, triumphant future. The quiet strength she had always possessed, the unwavering empathy, was now coupled with a fierce, unyielding determination to create a legacy of true, compassionate care. She began to sketch out plans late into the night, after Margaret had finally drifted off to sleep. Her small kitchen table became her command center, littered with notebooks, pens, and research papers on home healthcare models. The initial fear of the unknown still lingered, a faint shadow at the edges of her newfound hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of excitement and purpose. She envisioned a home care service that wasn't just about administering medication or performing routine tasks, but about holistic care, emotional support, companionship, dignity, and a deep understanding of each individual's unique needs. She would hire nurses and caregivers who shared her ethos, who understood that true healing extended beyond the physical. The practicalities were daunting, she knew. Licensing, insurance, staffing, marketing, a whole new world of challenges lay before her. But the thought of returning to the rigid, often impersonal environment of the hospital, even with an apology and revised policies, felt like a step backward. She had tasted the bitter fruit of that system's indifference, and she was no longer willing to compromise her values. The public's rallying cry, the collective voice of so many who understood her plight, had not just saved her, it had liberated her. It had shown her that there was a different way, a more human way, to provide care. Sarah, still a frequent visitor and now a close friend, became an invaluable ally. Her marketing skills and understanding of online communities proved instrumental. She helped Lisa design a brand, a logo that evoked warmth and trust, and a website that articulated Lisa's vision with clarity and compassion. The donations continued to trickle in, a testament to the ongoing public interest in her story, providing a crucial financial cushion as she navigated the complexities of starting a business. The apartment, though still humble, began to take on a new aura, not of despair, but of nascent creation, a workshop of dreams. Lisa's conversations with Margaret became infused with this new energy. She would share her ideas, her fears, her hopes, and Margaret, though often drifting, would offer words of encouragement, her eyes shining with a proud maternal love. "That's my girl," she would murmur, "always helping others, always finding a way." These moments of connection, of shared vision, became even more precious. Lisa realized that her mother's illness, while the catalyst for so much pain, was also, paradoxically, the wellspring of her greatest opportunity. It had forced her to confront the limitations of the existing system and to imagine a better alternative. She immersed herself in research, devouring books and articles on elder care, long-term care, and the business of healthcare. She sought advice from small business mentors, leveraging the media attention to open doors that would otherwise have remained closed. The journey was not without its setbacks. Bureaucracy was still a formidable opponent, and the sheer volume of paperwork often threatened to overwhelm her. There were moments of doubt, dark nights, when the enormity of the task weighed heavily on her, and she wondered if she was truly capable of such an undertaking. But then she would remember the faces of the people who had supported her online, the stories they had shared, the collective belief in her mission, and she would push through, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. The old hospital, with its sterile corridors and its rigid policies, began to fade into the background, a distant memory. The future was now defined by the warm glow of her laptop screen, the hopeful rustle of business plans, and the unwavering belief in a vision that was born of both personal hardship and profound public kindness. Lisa, the heartbroken nurse, was now Lisa, the visionary founder, her character arc complete, her destiny irrevocably altered by an explosion of human empathy. She was no longer just a caregiver. She was a creator, a leader, building a testament to the power of compassion, one thoughtful, dignified home visit at a time. The world had tried to break her, but instead it had shown her a path to true empowerment. Closing coda. The grand opening of Margaret's Haven Home Care was a day steeped in a quiet, profound joy. The small office space Lisa had secured, tucked away on a tree-lined street in a vibrant Boston neighborhood, was filled with the scent of fresh paint and blooming flowers. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, illuminating the tasteful, comforting decor she had chosen. Soft blues and greens, warm wood accents, and framed photographs of Margaret in her healthier, happier days. Sarah, beaming, stood by her side, helping to greet the small crowd of well-wishers. Henderson, a few former colleagues from the hospital who had secretly supported her, and several of the online supporters who had become local volunteers. Even this Albright, looking surprisingly subdued, had sent a large bouquet of white lilies, a silent, perhaps reluctant, acknowledgement of Lisa's remarkable journey. Margaret, looking frail but remarkably alert, sat in a comfortable armchair, a soft blanket draped over her lap, a gentle smile playing on her lips. She watched Lisa, her eyes filled with an undeniable pride, a quiet understanding of the odyssey her daughter had undertaken. Lisa, dressed in a smart, professional outfit that still held a hint of her caregiver's practicality, moved through the room with a newfound confidence, her posture straighter, her eyes shining with a hopeful determination. She spoke to each person with genuine warmth, her gratitude palpable. She spoke of her vision, a place where empathy was not a luxury but a fundamental principle, where caregivers were supported and appreciated, and where every client received the individualized, dignified attention they deserved. This, Lisa said, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the small gathering, is not just a business. This is a promise. A promise that no one should ever have to choose between caring for a loved one and keeping their livelihood. A promise that compassion, true human compassion, will always find a way to thrive. She looked at her mother, a silent testament to the love that had started it all. This is for you, Mama, and for everyone like you. The journey had been arduous, marked by moments of profound despair and an almost unbearable sense of injustice. But from the ashes of her lost career, from the depths of her personal struggle, something beautiful and resilient had emerged. Lisa, the hopeless nurse, had transformed into Lisa, the empowered founder, her spirit forged in the fires of adversity. She had not only reclaimed her calling, but had redefined it, creating a haven of care that bore her mother's name, a living testament to the multiplied kindness of strangers and the unyielding power of a daughter's love. The piano and gentle strings that now played softly in the background seemed to echo the quiet triumph of her heart, a melody of hope that would resonate far beyond the walls of Margaret's Haven. Thank you for making it to the end. If this explosion of emotions narrative left you breathless and forever transformed, like now and share immediately with someone who loves life-changing tales. Before everyone misses this bombshell, tell me in the comments which city you are listening to this story from.